I'd like to talk today a little bit about novel writing and novel publishing in Canada, in CanLit, which really is a short form or rather a euphemism for ANCANLIT, primarily English language publishing in Canada, an issue that I will have to deal with in another post. But what I'd like to talk about today is the relationship between novel publishing and movie making. Both industries have a hard go of it in Canada. And one reason is because their audiences are quite small. Now, in order to expand their audiences, a number of ideas have been proffered. And one of them is to write more accessible material, and the other is to simply teach more Canadian fiction and poetry in high schools. Both ideas have been championed by a writer named Alan Stratton, a playwright and a novelist who recently published an article in The Walrus saying that the curriculum in high schools and middle schools needs to reduce its dependence on Shakespeare. He thinks there's too much Shakespeare, kids don't like it, it alienates them, and there is other good work out there. And as examples, he mentions some Canadian work on themes that he thinks would be appropriate for teens. Now, it's a complicated argument, and I don't want to deal with that particular Walrus article right now, but instead what I'd like to do as a sort of preamble is I'd like to refer to a review that was written of one of his novels, The Dogs, and was published in the trade magazine Quill and Choir by the reviewer Sarah Ellis. And in the review, Ellis observes that the protagonist speaks in a sort of simple language. The protagonist is named Cameron. He's a young boy, young kid. Ellis writes, Cameron's speech is plain, restrained, and slightly formal, with minimal use of either slang or figurative language. When he's angry, anxious, or ashamed, he admits it to himself and to the reader. This kind of straightforward emotional signaling is characteristic of, quote, high-low, unquote, series books for reluctant readers. In this context, it reads not as contrived telling, but as poignant vulnerability. Likewise, the abundance of horror tropes, the howling of vicious dogs, the body in the trunk of a car, a scene in a foggy cemetery, skeletons under the barn floor, could be cheesy but aren't, etc. Now, I'd like to zero in on that whole issue of what Ellis terms reluctant readers. Of course, as anybody who teaches know, most young people these days, no matter how intelligent they are, rarely buy and read books for pleasure. They are good readers, they're very literate, but they don't like reading fiction for pleasure, and they're not very keen on going out and buying books. They spend most of their time watching streamed movies these days during COVID, listening to music and so forth, or watching YouTube videos. The other thing that I'd like to focus on is this idea, this narrative strategy that Stratton adopts of having a protagonist who speaks in a very plain kind of voice, restrained and slightly formal, lack of slang or figurative language. That means Cameron doesn't joke, for example, doesn't use slang. Now, there may be other reasons why Stratton didn't want to tackle slang. He's older than I am, which is getting up there. So he may have felt that he wasn't in touch with the way young people speak these days. But it does definitely suggest, this review definitely does suggest that the book is rather humorless and written in a way that would be frankly boring to a more intelligent adolescent reader. Now, I think that this approach of high-low publishing for reluctant readers is misdirected in a general sense. And what I've noticed about young students, whether one categorizes them as reluctant readers or what, is that they are actually very, very perceptive and very attuned to wit in movies and TV shows. And I think that is because TV and movie writers who are also aiming for broad audiences, including teens, and I'm thinking here of action movies, for example, the Marvel series, um, don't patronize their readers and don't assume that one has to effectively dumb down one's narrative approach, one's narrative complexity, one's wit, in order to reach readers, audiences. And I think there is this growing divide between a rather dumbed down print culture for young readers and a very witty, clever, elaborate, narratively and linguistically elaborate movie culture. And that is something that's going to catch up with print publishing one of these days for YA readers. Now, I realize there are many exceptions to this. There are clever, witty YA books out there, and good for them. But this idea that the reluctant readers, who are actually a huge percentage of readers, need to get the narrative equivalent of a kind of pablum presented to them, I think is just wrong. And I think a much better approach would be to write the novels directly as if they are movie scripts. Now, I have been trying this idea for many, many years, and I have been appalled by the amount of resistance that I've encountered from publishing folk. Now, this is particularly true in Canada. I mean, Canadians in publishing are small c conservatives, almost to a person. There are some advantages to that, but there are some big disadvantages. And there is a sort of subset of experimental fiction, which is very lively in Canada. But in terms of mainstream publishing, the idea of a screenplay as a novel meets with tremendous resistance, and I think that's a mistake. I also think that these screenplay type novels should have art in them, and I think that would help sell the books. Again, there's tremendous resistance to this among Canadian publishers, and I can prove it. So maybe at some point in the future, there will be a time when the vitality and cleverness of movie scripts, which do appeal to young viewers and even the reluctant ones, and print publishing will finally merge together in a way that is appealing to young people. But I think that will require some more open-mindedness on the part of Canadian publishing.